It was early September, and Senator Chuck Schumer was in upstate New York, just outside of Elmira, for a big announcement.
Thank you so much.
The giant multinational company Siemens unveiled plans for a first-of-its-kind high-speed rail production plant in the U.S., bringing hundreds of jobs to the rural New York town of Horseheads. The decision aided by the bipartisan infrastructure law that Schumer had ushered through the Senate.
We are going to be the center of railcar and high-speed railcar manufacturing in the whole country.
A short time later, Schumer rushed back to Washington for the swearing in of a new senator from New Jersey. This is Schumer's juggling act, balancing the business of Senate Majority Leader with the pedestrian rituals of a local politician. Even as he has risen to the pinnacle of power, he still visits each of New York's 62 counties every year, continuing a tradition he began when first entering the Senate.
If you had asked me, like, is Schumer a workaholic? I'd say no, he's not a workaholic. He works harder than most workaholics.
That relentlessness has been a hallmark of Schumer's political career and a major reason for its durability. We sat down with him at the Corning Museum of Glass right after that high-speed rail announcement.
If anything, I've been persistent in just about everything I've done, and what I have found is usually it pays off.
Schumer was born in Brooklyn, the son of an exterminator and a homemaker. Fresh out of Harvard Law School, he was elected to the New York State Assembly at 23, the youngest person to do that since Teddy Roosevelt. He moved on to Congress, winning notice for passing legislation like the Brady Bill, which required background checks for most gun purchases.
We are all frightened for our children. We're disgusted by this orgy of handgun slaughter.
And after Republicans took control of the House in 1995, sending Democrats to the minority, a frustrated Schumer set his sights higher.
I have been majority Senate, majority House, minority House. Only one really sucks. So I left the House to go to the Senate.
But to get there, he'd have to defeat two New York institutions.
No matter what next week brings.
First, former Democratic Congresswoman Geraldine Ferraro. Schumer defeated her in a three-way Democratic primary. And then the incumbent senator, three-term Republican Alphonse D'Amato.
I'm going to continue to work and fight for the people of this state.
Known as Senator Pothole because of his work on constituent services.
Would have been easier to run against anybody. Chuck Schumer works as hard, if not harder than anybody. He's bright, he's articulate.
To counter D'Amato, Schumer deployed what would soon become a staple of his politics, talking consumer and kitchen table issues aimed at appealing to a hypothetical middle-class family he dubbed the Baileys.
They want to be taken seriously. They are not that partisan. They want to make sure you care about what they care about, show them some respect, and realize that they just want a better life for themselves and their kids.
Schumer campaigned as a centrist Democrat and relentlessly stumped upstate, betting he could narrow the Republicans' advantage in their traditional stronghold. The strategy worked, redefining how a Democrat could win in the state. Schumer won with nearly 55% of the vote.
We're going to cross the finish line ahead of Al D'Amato.
In the Senate, Democratic leader Harry Reid of Nevada became one of Schumer's mentors. Ahead of the 2006 election, Reid named Schumer chair of the Senate Democrats' campaign arm. Schumer stayed on for the 2008 election, too. Democrats gained seats in both campaign cycles.
Harry Reid recognized Chuck's skill and Chuck's uncanny ability to communicate otherwise arcane policy into sort of common sense, meat and potatoes messaging that people understood and could connect with.
An uncanny ability to communicate coupled with a driving ambition that's played out in different ways.
They're rampant in the high schools.
As he worked his way up the political ladder in New York, Schumer routinely scheduled news conferences, often focused on consumer issues, for every Sunday, sensing correctly that media outlets were starved for stories on a normally slow news day. On Capitol Hill, Senator Bob Dole first uttered what would become a cliche, that the most dangerous place in Washington is between Schumer and a camera. Former aides say Schumer could be demanding and hard-charging, but also willing to hear out their ideas. And funny, even quirky.
I've been told your song of choice is It's Raining Men. Can you please explain why?
I just love the song. But we have a little party every year. We call it Christmas in Schumerland. And I have led the staff dancing around with turning the umbrellas upside down. That's the lyrics of the song. To the song. It's a tradition.
Retired California Senator Barbara Boxer worked alongside Schumer for nearly 2 decades.
Chuck is one of the smartest people I know. He's very, very bright. It's disarming because he's also very funny and he's self-deprecating, and he just, it takes a while to get him because of all that.
The alumni network of former Schumer aides is large, stretching to many corners of Washington and beyond.
He's the only man that crashed my bridal shower in Brooklyn. He rode his bike over.
By 2017, when Reid retired, Schumer's Democratic colleagues had elected him as their new leader. And in 2021, after Democrats picked up a few more Senate seats, he ascended to the job he long sought, Majority Leader, the first New Yorker and the first Jewish person to hold the position.
If you were to ask someone about Chuck Schumer in 1998, they would probably describe to you ambitious, sharp-elbowed New Yorker, really working his way to be noticed, be seen, centered on himself. I think if you asked anyone about who Chuck Schumer is today, they would tell you that he is the same level of energy around accomplishment, but with a much more sophisticated and accomplished worldview around the way you get that done.
With the new job came new power. Power he'd wield to pass big national legislation that would touch communities back home. In Washington, Kevin Fry, New York 1. It was a marquee matchup of the 1998 election. Democratic Congressman Chuck Schumer and Republican Senator Al D'Amato facing off in a nasty and costly campaign.
After 18 years, it's time for the hypocrisy to end.
Schumer won, ending D'Amato's 18-year Senate career. More than 2 decades later, D'Amato tips his hat to his successor, praising Schumer's ability to get things done, invoking an example back home.
He hasn't held back when we needed money for our sewage treatment plant and said, oh, that's a Republican stronghold. He worked for it. He got it for us. I want to tell you, I salute him for that. And if there are people in the Republican Party who are annoyed at me for saying these things about him, screw them. I call it the way I see it.
Even as his power and portfolio in Washington have grown, from freshman senator to Senate Majority Leader, Schumer remains tethered to New York. From parades in Manhattan,
Hi guys, thank you for your service,
to the annual state fair in Syracuse. He makes a point of visiting every one of New York's 62 counties every single year.
I find being on the scene and actually talking to people, real flesh and blood, is a much more effective way both to learn and to understand what people need. So I keep doing it, and I love it. I love it as much today as I did the first year.
We met up with Schumer on one of those trips to Corning in Steuben County. These 62 county swings are a way to connect with conservative upstate voters who are normally suspicious of downstate Democrats. They also dovetail with Schumer's reputation as a workhorse. Schumer says they inspire his legislative work, giving him ideas for macro policy proposals in D.C. that can have tangible micro benefits back home.
There's the local stuff and there's the national stuff. Not only do I like doing both, not only is it an important part of my job to do both, but one helps you do the other.
Perhaps few bills underscore this approach more than the CHIPS and Science Act, legislation designed to encourage the domestic production of semiconductors. Schumer worked with Indiana Republican Senator Todd Young on the bill, an idea hatched in part in the Senate gym.
I could trust him when something needed to be kept confidential over the course of negotiations, never to violate my trust.
The law has triggered commitments for tens of billions of dollars in spending to build computer chip facilities across the country, including in New York, such as Micron's plan to spend up to $100 billion over 20 years to establish a factory outside Syracuse.
If there's a word to describe today, it's transformational.
And IBM's plans to invest $20 billion in the Hudson Valley. Corning CEO Wendell Weeks tells Spectrum News he's worked with Schumer to help make the pitch for these sorts of investments.
I help him with other of my peers from around the world explain why New York can be the right place for them. He is at one time both this national figure working on issues and opportunities of global importance, but at the same time, he is intensely focused on what's happening right here in New York State.
Another Schumer priority, the construction of a new train tunnel under the Hudson River. The current tunnels are more than a century old and were damaged during Hurricane Sandy, making the new tube critical to the future of the New York, Northeast, and U.S. economy. The Trump administration was accused of delaying the long-sought plan. But after Joe Biden entered the White House, Schumer helped push through the bipartisan infrastructure law, securing some of the final chunks of the federal funding required.
With these new dollars, Gateway's future is assured.
Deputy U.S. Transportation Secretary Polly Trottenberg once worked as Schumer's legislative director.
There have been so many near-death experiences for that project. One thing I'd say about Senator Schumer, he always kind of kept hope alive and continued to nudge and push it, and then finally the stars aligned.
Schumer lobbied to keep the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo. And in the face of tragedy, stepped in, helping steer federal aid to New York after the 9/11 attack and Superstorm Sandy.
It's just killing me what these people have to go through.
Plus aid to theaters and cultural centers nationwide amid pandemic-induced shutdowns. The Corning Museum of Glass among those receiving the assistance.
It was instrumental in helping us to survive until our visitation returned and got back to pre-COVID numbers again.
One thing Schumer is particularly proud of is ending, at least temporarily, New York's status as a, quote, donor state that sends more money to Washington in tax revenue than it gets back in federal spending. That imbalance was a major frustration of the late Senator Dan Patrick Moynihan. In the past 3 years, fueled by federal COVID relief spending, New York finally received more than it sent away. However, the state comptroller warns the trend may not last. Despite his intense focus on New York and senior status in Democratic circles, aides say one role Schumer has not adopted is that of power broker within the state Democratic apparatus, whereas his predecessor, D'Amato, is credited with using his influence to make George Pataki the GOP nominee for governor. Schumer's focus has been elsewhere.
Being a party boss or attempting to sort of control the machinations of a political party doesn't necessarily lend itself to the kind of relationships necessary when you've got to build coalitions or you've got to bring home the bacon or you have to bring home policy results.
Ward Todd, a former Republican official in Ulster County, praises Schumer for his willingness to put party aside at times in pursuit of delivering federal spending and projects.
I truly felt as if he was our local representative, much like our congressman was. He was here that often.
And there's this from Schumer's old rival, D'Amato, who was known as Senator Pothole because of his ability to deliver for New York. What kind of senator is Schumer? What would you call him?
Senator Everything. He's all over.
In Washington, Kevin Fry, New York 1. It was a promotion amid crisis and by the slimmest possible margin. The nation, still gripped by a pandemic, had just endured a divisive national election and an attack on the U.S. Capitol. That's when Democrats pulled off victories in 2 runoff elections for the U.S. Senate in Georgia, taking control of the Senate for the first time in 6 years. With those wins, Chuck Schumer got the job he had long sought, and the one allies anticipated he he'd eventually secure Majority Leader.
There is much to do, and we are ready to get to work.
Are you surprised that he's risen to the role he's in now?
Not in the slightest. I think I worked for Chuck Schumer for about 5 minutes before I realized he was probably the most driven and relentless person I had ever met, with an ability, in some ways, I think, to shape reality.
The Senate was split 50-50. Schumer had little margin for error. If Democrats hope to pass their agenda and take advantage of a rare trifecta in Washington, running the Senate, House, and White House, he would have to be creative.
It's what the founding fathers envisioned.
But Schumer had been preparing for this role for years. As a freshman senator, Senate lions like Harry Reid and Ted Kennedy took him under their wing. I asked what he learned from them.
There's a time and a place to be bipartisan and get things done, but there's also a time and a place to stand up when we think the other side is taking advantage, doing the wrong thing for the country. And you have to do both as leader. You can't just do one or do the other, or you're not doing your job fully.
When he began as Majority Leader, those two approaches were on display. He oversaw passage of the first gun reforms in decades, a bill to spur the domestic production of semiconductors, and an infrastructure law, all with bipartisan support. At the same time, Democrats went it alone on a major climate bill.
I think the last Congress was a culmination of his greatest ambitions. He's a visionary, and he's somebody who's very practical minded. So he has the big vision, but then he does the practical things to make that happen.
Schumer says he did not emulate his Democratic predecessor as Majority Leader entirely.
Harry Reid was more of a solo type guy, and he'd make up his mind. I'd be the person he'd talk to before that. I try to involve everybody.
Schumer keeps in contact with his diverse caucus constantly, gauging each member's unique needs back home, legislatively and politically.
Gotta call you back.
His old school flip phone, a constant presence.
Chuck made it his job, even before he was leader, to try to understand what everybody's challenges were. And I had a basket full of them.
Ideologically, Senate Democrats range from Bernie Sanders on the left to Joe Manchin on the right. Achieving unity was not easy. Schumer, though, relishes the legislative process.
To get a caucus to work together, even though we're from different states with different viewpoints, it's like almost baking a beautiful cake. You feel good about it.
Some Senate Republicans, particularly those with ambitions to rise up the ranks of power, paint Schumer as a fiercely partisan warrior, a New York Nancy Pelosi.
He's just a partisan hack.
The problem is Chuck Schumer. The problem is Nancy Pelosi.
Someone willing to put Republicans in a tough spot if it's to his party's advantage.
He's not interested in making policy. And Kamala Harris, she's not interested in making policy. They're interested in ridiculous show votes so that they can win elections.
His efforts to flip key battleground Senate seats have also generated tensions with possibly useful Republican allies. Senator Susan Collins, a moderate from Maine, reportedly was furious with Schumer in the aftermath of his efforts to defeat her in 2020. But Republicans who have worked across the aisle with Schumer offer praise, even if they'd prefer to see a member of their own party leading the chamber.
He has a lot of deeply held convictions that I don't always share. But that said, there's another part of his personality that's really important, and that's of a legislator. That's of someone who understands how to negotiate and come up with compromise.
Senator Todd Young of Indiana and Schumer collaborated on semiconductor legislation before turning to work on artificial intelligence.
There are two types of legislators here. There are workhorses and then there are show horses. And then occasionally there are legislators like Senator Schumer who can be both.
Despite his legislative wins on climate change and infrastructure, Schumer did not succeed on all of the goals for the Democratic trifecta. His party's so-called Build Back Better agenda was pared down in order to corral support for more moderate members in the chamber. Also notably left undone, passing new protections for voting rights, which became mired in a fight over the Senate filibuster. Then Democratic Senators Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema objecting to modifying the 60-vote procedural threshold.
Leaders are only as powerful as their majority of members allow them to be.
They are strong when the party is united and they want to do something, but they look weak and ineffective if their party is not united behind them. And the filibuster was one of those instances, given the fact that they didn't have votes to spare, where he didn't have the votes to do it.
When Republicans took control of the House last year, much of the major legislative work on Capitol Hill ground to a halt. Though Senate Democrats did confirm many more of the president's judicial nominees.
Madam President.
These days, Schumer has taken to invoking Robert Caro, the acclaimed biographer of former president and Senate Majority Leader Lyndon Johnson. Caro, Schumer says, has called him the Jewish LBJ.
Ironically, I started out in politics protesting the Vietnam War and disliking Lyndon Johnson. But I came to respect Lyndon Johnson as a guy who got things done.
It's that drive to do things, Schumer's former aides argue, that defines him. One aide telling me that the Brooklynites' favorite axiom is, quote, always be happy, never be content.
When will you be content?
God knows. My staff will tell you I'm happy. I love them. They're great. But I'm always pushing myself. I think I push myself harder than I push anybody, but I push my staff pretty hard, too.
Any plans to retire? Any idea when you'll know?
No. I just, you know what? I have not had a master plan. I just did my job and it all worked out. So I'm just doing my job. Lord knows what'll happen next.
The November election, which will decide the next president and whether Democrats can hold on to the Senate majority and Schumer can remain the majority leader, will help to write that next chapter. In Washington, Kevin Fry, New York 1.